Good evening, everyone. Kyle with Andrew Hilton here, and welcome to our incredibly hot Friday in the first weekend of July. So we are doing some backyard patio wines. We are joined tonight by Eric Mercier of Juice Imports. Hello, Eric.
Hello.
And at some point when Skype decides to cooperate with us, we will be joined by Andrew Alvino, whenever Skype decides to stop being a dick. So in the meantime, we're going to start with the Broc cellar stuff. We were originally going to start with the Mondeversa white, but, you know, Andrew's not here, and as much fun as it would be for you and I to just make fun of his wine for 45 minutes while he can't participate, we should probably talk about your wines instead. So we're going to start with the Broc Cellars Love Rosé. Eric, I mean, Broc Cellars has been a massive hit for us. Like, the Broc Cellars Love Red was literally our best-selling item in the store last year. Forget wines, it outsold, like, Corona 24-pack bottles last year. Yeah, tell us about Broc Cellars. I mean, I got to go last summer, but you lead us in. It's your brand.
Totally. So yeah, Broc Cellars was started by Chris Brockway, a winemaker down in California. His actual winery is located in Berkeley, so not a place that you would normally associate with wine tourism. And the whole idea behind that was that the amount of money that you would have to spend on owning a winery in Napa Valley would be exorbitant. And every time somebody bought a bottle of wine, a percentage of that bottle sale would have to go towards paying for this tasting room in Napa Valley. So they wanted to, make their wines less expensive than the wines in Napa Valley while still using the same quality of fruit, but B, make sure that every dollar that you were spending on the wine was actually for wine. It wasn't for branding. It wasn't for marketing. It wasn't for a big fancy $1 million tasting room. You're literally just spending money on the actual farming and on the winemaking and the actual quality, basically. So they decided to locate their winery in Berkeley, basically in the industrial area of Berkeley. They actually converted an old ink factory into a winery.
But yeah, all right, ink factory it is.
Yeah. So it's just basically a warehouse space. And this has sort of turned into a weird little hub in Berkeley now, however long later it's been. So you have guys like Donkey and Goat, which is a producer that Andrew, who will eventually be on this call, imports into Alberta. They're amazing. You have guys like Méthode Sauvage, those wines are amazing and not imported into Alberta yet. So there's a handful of really great producers in this area. They've been going for a little over 10 years now, I want to say. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's about 10 years, plus or minus a year. And just so you know, too, you're cutting out a little bit. So
am I? Okay.
So
sorry.
As long as I'm cutting out, it doesn't really matter. But if you're asking me questions and I just zip by them, I apologize.
Eric is substantially louder than Kyle. Well, that's good. He's more interesting than I am. So that broadly balances out.
That works for me. So yeah, about the actual wine. So in this case, we have a rosé. Rosés, contrary to popular belief, are neither made from blending white wine and red wine together, nor are they made from pink grapes, at least not usually. It's usually made by taking red grapes and just pressing them really gently so that you're only extracting mostly just the juice that's on the inside of the grapes, which is usually not colored, and it just picks up a little bit of color from the skin as that juice sort of trickles out. That's exactly what's done here. This is made mostly from a grape variety called Valdiguié. Valdiguié has been planted in California for over 100 years. Originally, they had no idea what the grape variety was. People brought it over in the bottom of ships and then trucked it across. And they had no idea what they're planting. It was, again, in somebody's suitcase, and then they threw it in the ground. And then it spread sort of like wildfire and ended up being one of the most planted grapes in California, basically up until after World War II, when things like Cabernet Sauvignon got really popular, Pinot Noir, Merlot, grapes like that got really popular. But up until that point, Valdiguié, known as Napa Gamay at that particular time because it tasted so much like Gamay and was grown in Napa, was the most popular grape for a handful of reasons. One being that it yields pretty well, so it you can get a lot of wine out of not a lot of vines. And then the other thing is it's naturally very disease resistant, meaning that you don't have to spray it with, pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. It's actually quite fine on its own, which is fantastic for Broc because they only work with organic vineyards. So when you work with a grape that's really easy to grow organically, it just makes everything easier versus Pinot Noir. It's hard to grow Pinot Noir when you're using chemicals, let alone when you're trying to grow it organically. So Valdiguié is absolutely genius. It's always very bright, fresh, very juicy, very fruit forward, usually quite light in body. This wine's only 11% alcohol, which is, again, phenomenal. Like, I really like low alcohol wines because then I can drink more of them or not feel bad for, quenching my thirst with wine. And this one's grown in an area called Green Valley. Green Valley is sort of adjacent to Napa Valley. It's just sort of a little more around the bay, I suppose. Lower elevation, so you get a lot of fog in the morning. And these vines are actually like over 70 years old now. They've never been watered and they've never been sprayed. So it's kind of the ideal situation. So this is not just your regular rosé. This is like obscenely high quality wine that just happens to be pink and light in body. It's still very complex. It's still very nuanced.
So a few things I want to circle back to there because I was just going to let you go as long as you were going to go there, but there was a few things I wanted to circle back to. First off, I want to just touch on, because I've been meaning to do just all the types of making rosé event at some point here, Eric, but I haven't gotten around to it. So like you said, lightly pressed red wine, but of course there are some rosés like Ryan Sturm's that are literally just blending red and white wines together. There's the Saignée method. Do you want to talk a little bit about, there's no wrong way to skin a cat, there's no bad way to make a rosé as long as you're not making white zin. Do you want to talk a little bit about the various ways you can actually come to a pink wine in the end?
Yeah, definitely. So in places like Europe, it's actually illegal in almost every region to blend white and red wine together to make rosé. There used to be like an old school term for this. I want to say that it was called scratch or something like that. And it was this style of wine that was red and white blended together. But it was only drank locally. It was literally illegal for them to actually be exporting these things. The only region where that was an exception was actually in Champagne, where you often see both red and white wine blended together to make their rosés. So that's one of the few examples of that. Then you have a Saignée method, which is basically where you crush all the grapes, let it macerate on the skin for a very short period of time, and you draw off some of that juice. And basically what happens is you're getting kind of the equivalent of like an ultra light red wine. They usually have a little bit more body, a little bit more intensity, and they're really delicious stylistically. You also see this in Champagne, but they do it all around the world. The fortunate thing too is that if you're trying to make a really concentrated red wine, by bleeding off some of that juice as rosé, you end up with a higher ratio of juice to skin. So that red wine that you were making from the rest of the grapes would end up being super intense, really dark, really flavorful. Sometimes it can be a little bit too much, but often it can be pretty fantastic as well. Then you have things like basically quasi-orange wine. So there's actually a handful of grape varieties that are pink in color. So you have grape varieties like Pinot Gris, for instance, Gewürztraminer. You have a bunch of different types of like pink Carignan and pink Grenache Gris and Carignan Gris. So there's actually tons of different grape varieties that are neither red nor white. And you can actually ferment these on the skins and you'll actually get these almost rosé colored wines. They often end up being a little bit more coppery in color, but that's definitely another methodology for making rosé. So yeah, there's plenty of different ways to make rosé. It all just depends on what your goal is and what grape varieties you happen to be working with. But for Broc cellars, for this rosé, they're just doing direct press, which means that they just put whole clusters of grapes into the press, crush them really gently, and as that juice runs out, it just trickles over the red skins and extracts a tiny, tiny little bit of color. So that's their methodology, and that's basically the most elegant way of making rosé, for making sort of the lightest, crispest style, which makes sense in California where the grapes are really intense and flavorful. You kind of want to be very gentle with everything that you're doing instead of extracting a ton.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Andrew, can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Wonderful.
Yes,
can everybody hear Andrew? Hopefully, yes.
Hopefully, yeah.
So this is our second guest this evening. This is Andrew Stewart of Vino Al Vino. Thank you very much for joining us, Andrew.
Yeah. Sorry, I right away.
No, it's all right. It's technology concerns. We've had some very interesting times over the last 3 of these. I blame the soundboard continually. So we'll just put it on that and we'll move on. How are you tonight?
I'm wonderful, thank you. It's gorgeous and sunny here, so it's definitely summertime.
Yeah, it's very definitely summertime here. I was out on a bike ride this morning and everyone and their mum was either taking their camper to the campground or taking their boat to the lake. It was quite something. So we don't have a lot of people tonight. Our viewership right now is sitting at 19. So, we are holding our own in the height of summer.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great turnout.
Awesome. Well, we just finished doing the Broc Cellars Love Rosé. I'm going to impinge on Eric to kind of give us a tasting note on this for everybody at home, and then we will move right on to the Mondeversa, and then we will finish up with the Love Red. So let's quickly get a tasting note on the Love Rosé, Eric, and we'll kind of finish up with that, and then we'll move right on to the Mondeversa.
Totally. For me, this wine is definitely like on the strawberry end of the spectrum, like very much those sort of spring red fruit characteristics. It's not really like plummy or jammy or anything like that. It's more on that sort of like cranberry and like rose hip kind of end of the spectrum. Very delicate, quite mineral actually, which is interesting. Part of this is grown on volcanic soils, which I think adds almost a saline quality to it. Volcanic soils usually make a wine a little bit more rustic, but I think in this case, because they've made rosé, it's ended up, again, adding almost this like salty little edge to it. But yeah, I think it's, again, super crushable, especially at 11% alcohol, like I was saying. Like it just goes down like it's water, basically. We also only have like 6 cases left of it. They sell out of it super early in the spring every year. And so we just bring in what we can and then it's gone.
Well,
so
the nice thing about the wine tasting selling a little slow is I brought in 5 cases of the rosé for this and we sold about 24 of them. So I have 36 left and I'm in absolutely no hurry to sell them.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect.
And I don't think selling them is going to be a problem. The only thing that could possibly slow it down is the fact that the Coppage rosé just showed up and god damn, the vintage of Coppage rosé. Like, holy hell, that's a cool wine.
Oh yeah, it's those guys are absolutely amazing. They're just, everything they make is just insanely delicious. So yeah, very exciting.
Cool. Andrew, why don't you take us into Mondeversa? So it's Muscat, but not that Muscat. It's from Italy, but not that part of Italy. It's sparkling, but not that type of sparkling. So
it's a little out there. It's a bit of a, I mean, one of the reasons that I enjoyed working with this wine so much is I think Moscato or variations of, they get a bit of a bad rap because, generally they're just seen kind of like Riesling as like only being sweet and kind of uninteresting. And like their flavors are a little bit over the top and can be like a little obvious to some people. But
I kind of actually love Moscato d'Asti, even at low price points. It's delicious. If you don't like it, it's like, do you also hate puppies and rainbows? Like, why would you not like Moscato d'Asti? Like, what is it doing to offend you?
Yeah, how could it offend anybody? It's like all grapey, fruity, fresh lift, and like if anything, like I could say, the only real critique of it would be that sometimes it is a little sweet, and it's like yes, and sometimes Riesling can be sweet, sometimes Gewürztraminer can be extremely sweet, sometimes the red wines we're drinking we don't realize how extremely sweet they are and how much sugar is in them. But yeah, I think it's super fun, and funnily enough, Eric talked about volcanic soil. Like we're on volcanic soil with this guy as well. Mount Versa. So this is in the Colli Uggiani. It's in the Veneto region, northern Italy. Pretty decent, like high altitude. It's a little volcanic outcropping between Venice and Verona. And yeah, calcareous volcanic soil, very, very lifted, very bright. But what's really interesting about this, it's not a method de champenois. I would call it a variation of a pet nat. It's very pet nat. I think gets used a lot with things that aren't necessarily pet nats. They don't inoculate for this. It doesn't have a secondary fermentation. It has no dosage, and it does finish its fermentation in the bottle, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of fermentation left when it goes into the bottle. So I find that the bubbles are usually like they're quite strong somehow, which you would normally expect it to be the opposite. It lasts open very, very, very well, but it's dry. like I think this particular vintage is 11.5 or even 12% alcohol. There's I have to look at a sheet here, but I think there's like less than 3 grams per liter of residual sugar. So like it has a lot of sweet fruits, as Moscato does. Very floral, like it's literally like lychee white flower and grapes. Like it sounds weird to say that a wine is like grapes, but it's like a comically grape expression in Moscato. But because it's dry, because there's no residual sugar, the mouthfeel is like very crisp. Comparatively to, like you mentioned, Moscato d'Asti, it's not at all like cloying or heavy on the tongue, but the fruit and the flavor, it hangs on quite a long time, which I think is super fun. It's all the very, lovable aspects of Moscato d'Asti, but in this case, just Moscato vinified dry, maybe like a little tiny touch of haze, giving it like a little bit of texture from having a little tiny touch of lees in there as well, without like a sugar kind of texture, but just like very like acidic and bright and fun, very fresh.
I get a few questions I'm going to loop back to. First off, we actually have someone watching the wine tasting today who was in line at Broc today, and apparently the line was around the block for the wines. He waited half an hour to get into Broc Cellars. So apparently it was an international viewership on this hot Friday night in southern Alberta. Thank you very much, Benjamin, for watching. Second up, question for me, we keep talking about Moscato, but the Moscato that they're using here isn't the same Moscato strain that they're using in Asti or that they're using in a lot of other places. This is yellow Muscat. It's not Muscat Blanc or Petit Grain. Talk about the difference in, Muscat, for those who don't know, is an absolutely massive family of different strains between Autumnal and Alexandria and yellow Muscat and Muscat Blanc and all. There's bloody red Muscat. I mean, it's a massive family of different things. But let's talk about yellow Muscat in particular compared to the more commonly known.
Well, I mean, the Moscato that we all know in Asti is generally comes out a little bit sweeter. It's a little more, I would say, a little more fleshy. And you're right, it's a gigantic family of grapes. Like it's mind-boggling. This I feel like it has like. It's a deeper yellow berry. It's generally like really popular in Pasito styles. Like you get a lot of color and like a real like richness. I think it's planted a lot in Croatia as well. Early mid ripening, very vigorous. So it takes a lot of management to make sure that it doesn't get like really out of control in terms of its yield, and then you kind of dilute those flavors. And it's the biggest difference I would say here is like the Petit Grains. They reach higher levels of sugar, and the acids drop a lot quicker. This one maintains a pretty good balance of sugars and acids, if that's interesting to anybody at all.
But outside this crowd, that's probably very interesting. We'll probably get 6 questions about acid levels in Moscato. You never can tell with this crowd.
Well, and it's and also when you hear Muscat, like it is such a huge amount, but it's just like of different grapes and like labeled. Like orange Muscat, for example, was the first Muscat that I ever had, and it was like extremely like sweet and like kind of candied, and I didn't find it like particularly interesting, other than it was like, oh, it's very sweet, but you get a lot more color out of the yellow Muscat with just like a quick gentle pressing, but I feel like in this method they've gone like the complete opposite direction. They've harvested earlier. They've got like the aromatic freshness. I don't really know like how I would go into a lot of like. I don't really know a lot of the differences between this and other Muscat, to be honest with you, in terms of like clones. So I'm a little hard pressed to talk about that too much. But they do a Moscato Spumante in a sweet style as well, and it's the same grape. This is just all down to vinification.
I got a couple questions off of that. First off, what the heck did you have that orange Muscat was the first Muscat you ever heard, not like something actually common?
Oh, what the hell was it? I worked in an Italian restaurant. This is how I got into wine. It's an Italian restaurant here in Calgary. It's still kicking, and I think it had been around like 6 or 7 years before I moved to Calgary. So this has got to be it's got to be like 20 plus years now that this restaurant's been around. It's called Mondeversa. And they had from California, I think it was called.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about too.
It's got like a bad drawing of an angel on the label. It was like
I know that. What is that?
Oh God, I should remember this because we used it as a like just a little free giveaway because it wasn't very expensive, and it generally was very, very well received by people. Like they love getting a little sweet something of orange Moscato. What the hell was it? It wasn't Essentia. Yeah, I can't remember, but it was, that classic. It's 5% alcohol. It's, got a if you get it on your fingers, it's going to be there like stuck to your skin until you give your hands a good scrub because it's pretty syrupy. But yeah, people loved it. It was just like, it was a nice little way to cap out their meal. If they had been, especially, enthusiastic guests or they were celebrating something, rather than just bubbles at the start, it was like a nice little, and that wasn't even a very good one. So it actually, in the sense of like the quality of it, it wasn't a high quality one. So it was actually much more enjoyable for a lot of people because it wasn't so sweet. It wasn't so like cloying that you didn't even want to finish a glass. Like people guzzled that stuff. And we even use it in like sparkling cocktails and stuff like that. This is like literally 16, 17 years ago, but
yep.
I have a feeling that wine's still kicking around.
Probably
like,
still. Those sorts of things tend to stick around forever.
yeah.
Somebody actually pitched me Mount Riley Sauvignon Blanc the other day. I was like, that still exists? Oh dear God. What? It's like 2004 all over again.
Well, I think when you find a classic like that, people just keep discovering. Once it's somebody's favorite wine, it just keeps being introduced to other people, and it becomes their favorite wine, and they get stuck in that classic. This is the only wine I drink. It's like, oh my God, that's like saying I'm only going to wear one T-shirt the rest of my life. It seems so boring and so unnecessary.
Come on, leave Devin alone. He has more than one T-shirt. Moving right along, I had some questions from Craig regarding Pet Nat versus Method Champenoise. Just want to kind of review the difference between like a traditional champagne, a tank method, maybe the Moscato d'Asti because we have talked about it so much, and then just kind of finish on a Pet Nat.
Yeah, sure.
In quite brief. Okay,
Method de Champenoise, still wine, bottled with a dosage of sugar and yeasts. In most cases, it can be very small to a little bit higher, but it ferments in the bottle and is then disgorged, expelling all the sediment after being riddled and disgorged. Pet Nat, in most cases, is a single fermentation, either done in the bottle with no additions at all, or it's a fermentation that starts outside of the bottle, but then as it's going, goes into the tank. Like some people do it like that as well, and I feel like that's not maybe like a traditional, like a typical Pet Nat. But the biggest difference I would say there is that it doesn't get disgorged, so you're left with the yeast cells from the fermentation, which I think act as a really nice like natural barrier. They keep the wine very healthy. I think Eric, if you agree or disagree with that, like I think what I like about Pet Nats is like you don't have anything else in there, and I feel like that yeast and microbial life, whether it's dead or alive, it helps keep the wine alive. And then tank method or Syrah method, it was a method of like making inexpensive sparkling wines where all that fermentation takes place in a tank, and they just transfer from the tank to the bottle. So the CO2 is trapped, but the yeast, I don't actually know. I've never actually looked into this, how they remove the yeast.
It's filtered under pressure.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I imagine it's just a filter, but it's just transferred through and then into bottles. So it's very cheap and inexpensive. There's none of the riddling and the rack and the time. Everything that makes champagne or like any kind of sparkling wine more expensive, or wine more expensive, usually is because a big part of it is they've added time and effort to do it a certain way. It's like if you can find a cheaper and easier and faster way to do it, well then yeah, a lot of people go that way. So champagne, because it is so labor intensive and it takes so much time, obviously there's a higher price inherently. Forget the fact that it's a higher regarded area and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean that's the like cliff notes, like very quick. Like,
thank you, and that's I think exactly what Craig was looking for. Deirdre says that she likes the flavor of the muscat, but finds the carbonation takes away from it. I disagree. I mean, it's hot as anything. I'm probably actually hotter than you. For those of you who can't tell, these lights are incredibly warm. I'm constantly sweating under them. I hate them so much, but we have to have them. Craig happily bought us a much cooler light that puts out less light, but it's much cooler, and I appreciate it very much. Question that I have, and this is a question that I actually get fairly often, is people see the alcohol levels, and these are people who know enough to be dangerous. And I'll pitch this just to you, Eric, because you haven't had a chance to say anything for a while, and I feel kind of bad for leaving you hanging so long. How are these wines at 10.5%, 11% alcohol? How are these dry wines when most people associate like a dry red or a dry white being kind of 13.5 to 14.5? How are they achieving this level of dryness without massive crushing amounts of alcohol?
Yeah, there's sort of two different things at play here. One is your farming methodology. So for a lot of these natural winemakers, because they're not able to acidify afterwards, what they have to do is they have to harvest when the acidity is right, not when the sugar is at a certain point. And because of that, it tends to be at lower alcohol levels, at lower sugar levels, which then lead to lower alcohol levels. If you harvest a wine too late and the acidity is gone, there's basically nothing you can do. And acidity is one of the ways in which wine protects itself. So things like, the nasty bacteria that are going to make your wine spoil, they like to exist at lower levels of acidity. So for these natural winemakers who aren't using any protective methods, like adding things in order to protect the wine, they basically have to harvest with higher levels of acidity. And because of that, they're harvesting earlier, which therefore leads to lower levels of sugar, which leads to lower levels of alcohol. And then the second thing is that they're fermenting these wines completely dry. With a wine that is, 7% alcohol, but with lots of sugar, or 10% alcohol with lots of sugar, basically what's happening is that they're stopping the fermentation. So that wine had the potential to maybe be 13% alcohol, but before the yeast were able to consume all that sugar, they added sulfur or they sterile filtered out all the yeast, and that basically stopped the fermentation. And so you ended up with basically halfway between juice and wine. And this leads to higher levels of sugar, versus with natural winemakers, because they're not sterile filtering, because they're not adding massive amounts of sulfur or any of those other sort of protective additives to stop fermentation, they basically usually need to ferment to pretty close to complete dryness. So like in the case of this Muscat, we're talking about less than 3 grams per liter of sugar. That's the case with both the rosé and the red as well. They're sitting at, definitely less than 3 grams per liter. I think the red is probably around 1 gram per liter of sugar. If you look at something like orange juice at 95 grams per liter, that's how dry these are. So there's basically nothing for yeast and bacteria to eat in that case. And that's why natural wines tend to be A, dry, and B, lower in alcohol, yet still perform like regular wines. So that would be my sort of thought on why these wines tend to be lower in alcohol.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much. I'm just going to cut in here for a moment and just talk about some upcoming business. So it's hot. People are getting outside and going to the lake and doing camping, boating, outdoorsy sorts of things, and not so much staying home and drinking. And I think that's a very good thing. Not so much good for the business, but good for people in general. As a result, this has been our slowest selling wine tasting, which is a bit of a shame because we have some absolutely amazing wines and better guests. So as a result, we are going to take 2 weeks off from the wine tasting. We're going to keep rolling with the beer tastings, but we're going to take 2 Fridays off for the wine tastings. Now, that's really only the same as taking 1 weekend off, because we were always going to take 2 Fridays from now off so that Aaron could go canoeing. That was just kind of booked in when we first started doing this. But we are going to take 2 Fridays off in a row, and then we're going to come back strong with Beaujolais in a couple of weeks. We're going to do a Beaujolais Village, actually 2, a Beaujolais Blanc, and then the 4th wine, we have not decided whether we're going to do a sparkling Maconnais made by a Beaujolais producer, or if we're going to try and just squeeze a Cru Beaujolais in under budget. We haven't figured out which yet. So that is what's coming up in 3 weeks, because I'm actually going to go home and see my wife and have dinner at home and not have A&W on a Friday night. It's going to be weird. However, we are running on with the beer tastings, so those continue to do exceedingly well. For this week's upcoming beer tasting, we're going to break open the vault and do nothing but super limited edition rare stuff because, hey, I like doing rare stuff as much as you guys like buying it. So we are going to do some super, super rare stuff, most of which I have to drive to Calgary to get. We have got the Pineapple FOMO, a beer that could have been really ironically named if it hadn't been a huge seller for them. But in terms of naming, it's actually very apt because people are constantly missing out. I actually have to drive to Calgary once a month to meet the SYC rep in a parking lot and pick this beer up. Next up, we have a tangerine goza from Zero Issue, so lightly salted sour ale with some tangerines. That's really, really cool. The Katharina Sour, this is from our second shipment of this, and it's our last shipment this summer. This is the Pink Guavas Katharina Sour from Establishment Brewing. It's absolutely tremendous if you haven't had it. And if you haven't had it, I'm going to force you to have it when you buy the beer tasting. So that's also upcoming. And then finally, our fruit beer tasting would not be complete without a beer that contains absolutely no fruit whatsoever. This is a Kviik fermented pale ale, basically, with mandarina, Bavaria, and Citra hops, all of which throw a massive citrus and orange character into the beer. And as a result, it tastes exactly like an orange ale, but contains no oranges. And we'll talk about why that's so fun this coming Wednesday at 6 o'clock. So that is what's coming. Me actually getting a Friday night off and beer tasting. So let us move forward into just about the best-selling item we've ever had in the store. And let's talk about some Love Red there, Eric.
I'm gonna hop in real quick because I actually had to go to a meeting at 6:45. I just want to say sorry for being late. First of all, thank you so much. And I've had the privilege of tasting the Love Rosé recently, and I've certainly drank a little bit of Love Red in the past. I haven't tried this new vintage yet, but you guys, you're in for a treat, obviously. So thanks, Sarah, for bringing those wines because they're showstoppers. I absolutely love them. So enjoy your weekend. Thanks so much. And we'll talk soon.
Yeah, you weren't late so much as Skype was being a jerk. So thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly.
Create a whole nother account, just to get on here. I don't know what happened.
We made it work and we're all good. Thanks
so much.
Have yourself a great weekend.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah. Cheers. All right, I think we are on to the Love Rosé. Oh, pardon me, the Love Red.
Love Red,
Blimey.
yeah.
Totally. So, yeah. Now, I think this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the fourth vintage of Love Red we've had through our store at least. Maybe you're on 5?
Yeah, I think we're through 5, but this would be your 4th. Yeah. And it's always slightly different every year, and it's always delicious every year. And the style changes ever so slightly every year, yet everybody seems to love it. So it's kind of like, it's definitely our number 1 selling wine of all time. So
it was our best-selling wine of all of last year. In fact, it was our best-selling item of last year. So yeah, we sold buckets of Love Red. One thing I talked about with you off camera before we got started here is I feel like the Valdiguié percentage on the Love Red has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller with every single passing year, which is a shame because I love Valdiguié. I love the Love Rosé, and I've had the opportunity to have the straight Valdiguié Red from Broc when I was at Broc because I don't think if it came to Alberta, we didn't get it. Any of the straight Valdiguiés, I don't think.
It sold out super quick last time, and then.
So what you're saying is it's entirely Devin's fault.
Last time, and then, we haven't they haven't released the new vintage yet, but the new vintage should be released within the next couple months, and we'll get it. We actually just placed an order with them, so we're getting in 2 new limited releases from them, which you will be very excited about because they're very much up your alley. So that'll be fun. So there will be new Broc in the near future here. But yeah, the Valdiguié probably won't be until couple months from now, I guess.
So, previous visitor to our show, Jesse from 88 just walked in. Hello, Jesse.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing all right.
This week?
This is our wine tasting, Jesse. So we're live on camera. Yeah, we got some 88 brewing getting dropped off today. We got some Wave Pool. We got a bunch of Ring Pop. We got some Tiffany. He didn't bring down anything cool because apparently Jesse just hates us now.
No, Ring Pop's cool.
No, they can't hear you. No, I can entirely delineate the conversation. It doesn't matter what you say. They can't hear you.
We can hear it. We can definitely hear it.
Oh, can you? Okay, well, fine. But yeah, we got Jesse's dropping off some stuff, so we will have Wave Pool on the shop for the next hour here, so that'll be really exciting. But yeah, so let's jump into the Love Red here. People are already loving it. I'm absolutely loving it because I always like this wine. I also want to say I like this new label a little bit more than the last. I like this black with the little tiny hearts.
Yeah. We've gotten, some people are mad that they changed it, but it's changed a little bit almost every year. They have an amazing artist who they just want to give her more and more work all the time. So they're constantly just coming up with new wines, new projects, new t-shirts. I have a calendar that was drawn by her. Just everything she does is really awesome. So definitely go to their website to check out her art. She does some good large installations and stuff as well. Her name is escaping me as usual. Joanna, I want to say is her name. Anyways, her art is absolutely amazing, so you should definitely check it out. But yeah, I really like this year's label. A little more simple. I like that style. Same thing with the rosé. The rosé is really nice and simple this year too.
When are we going to see the next Broc shipment? Because we are right out of white, and we've been out of white for a little while. When are we seeing the new vintage white, and when are we seeing a new Broc shipment in general? Because we're right out of Cuckoo Cab Franc. We're down to our last couple of bottles of Lone Pine Legrand. Like, we're getting... Also, that does really help me, because I always forget the Legrand rhymes with pine, and having that wine actually is very helpful.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
I was saying Legrand for years, like a pleb.
Yeah, we have a shipment landing in maybe two weeks at most, which there will be new vintage of Love White, which is apparently awesome. I'm super excited. Packaging change on that too, so it keeps up with everything else. We are also getting, and I don't think you've ever had this wine, their Vine Star Zinafandel, which is like, there. Yeah, it's the wine that they're like legendary for, and we haven't had it in a while, like probably a year.
I don't think we've ever had, Devin can correct me if I'm wrong, this might have been one of those ones that came in and those same 5 people who buy 2 bottles of everything cool when it shows up just bought it and it never saw the shelf, and even I didn't get one on my own store, which seems unfair. Those happen.
And then not only that, but we're actually getting in the new vintage of Frye Chenin Blanc, so single vineyard Chenin Blanc, which is like just completely lights out, like definitely stands up to any dry Vouvray that I've ever had for less money, and is just super spectacular. Like definitely one of my favorite wines in the portfolio. And again, we've been sold out of it for probably over a year. So those things are coming, as well as the new vintage of Amore Rosso.
Oh, nice.
Which will be super exciting as well, because that one always sells out in a day.
It's very exciting, but it's also not the Cab Franc. Either it's the Cab Franc on the shipment.
There's no Cab Franc on the shipment. I can get you Cab Franc if you want, though. I can make a
honestly,
request.
Of everything in like the upper market labels, like above Love Red, the Cab Franc is like the absolute ass kicker for us. We sell so much Cuckoo Cab Franc. Even my dad loves it, and he's like not totally sold on Broc Cellars, but that Cab Franc is just his jam.
All right. Well, I'll do you guys a solid, and I'll beg. I'm willing to beg just to get you guys a little more cuckoo. We'll sure.
Take it. We'll happily and proudly allow you to shamelessly beg on our behalf.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, we can definitely do that for you. So yeah, those things are coming in, and then restock of Love Red so that we don't run out. This is their largest production wine by a massive margin. Basically, the winery is really tiny, except for Love Red, which they make actually quite a bit of, like 3,000 cases, something like that, which is still small.
I'm laughing because of who our guest was last week. Last week we had on Darren Owers, who's the head winemaker for Nugan Estates out of Australia. Saying, the dried grape Nugan Australian Shiraz, like this is a super, super tiny production, like almost boutique label for us. We only make 30,000 cases of this. That's just nothing. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk about scale here, Darren. And we actually broke it down and said, okay, let's talk about scale here. And why 30,000 cases is not like a small boutique wine. It was actually a really interesting conversation having him on, because I think he's easily the largest producer we've ever had on in terms of wines.
Yeah.
And honestly, talking to him about making wine on that scale, and the whole reason why they have an Appassimento and a dried grape Shiraz being it was like one Danish like big supermarket chain that really wanted like a dried grape Amarone style and a Ripasso, but they wanted them from Australia, so they just said, "Okay, we'll try it. Sure, why not?" I love hearing stories, and now it's like this international 30,000 case brand that's just an absolute juggernaut. And it's like, yes, we did this because basically the Danish Safeway said we had to. And I love that that's a thing that we just get here now because Danish Safeway said, yes, let's do that.
Yeah. Well, that's like, I always use the statistic that Canada makes about 2.5 million cases of wine per year, and Dr. Lucen makes about 2 million cases a year of Dr. L. Riesling. So not just all their wines, literally just one single wine. They make almost as much as the entirety of every single winery that you've ever heard of from Canada, and all the ones that you haven't heard of from Canada, all combined. So literally like an entire country like imagine the economy behind the wines that we make in Canada. Like how many people work at each of those wineries? Like let's imagine that there's 10 people per winery minimum, if you were to average it out between everybody. And then you have to imagine that there's hundreds of wineries. There's probably close to 1,000 wineries in Canada now. And then they basically have like probably a staff of like maybe 100 people at Dr. Lucen making all their wines. And it's as much as Canada. Yeah. So it just goes to show like the economy of scale. Like that's how you can make a wine that is that tasty for that cheap. Because frankly, Dr. L Riesling for like, I don't know how much it costs anymore, but like $15 to $20 retail.
Yeah, I think somewhere in there. And it's serviceable. Like if I was in a liquor store attached to a gas station in a small town, and I saw a bottle of Lucen Dr. L Riesling, I would probably buy it because everything else would start with yellow or end with apothic, and no. So yeah, no, I mean, in terms of like the quality they're able to pull off on the scale they do, I think the Dr. Lucen stuff is actually all right. Like I don't even mind their upper end stuff. Like they have a GG Riesling that, you know what? It's a GG Riesling. It's still just fine.
Yeah, one of my epitome wines was, this was like, again, probably 10 years ago. And this was when I was first getting into wine. And the girl that I was seeing at the time was like, okay, you're getting really excited about wine, but you've never spent a lot of money on wine. Maybe like I'll buy you like a treat for your birthday. And she bought me their Erziger Würzgarten Auslese Riesling. And I was just like, I've never tasted anything like this. I didn't know that grapes could make flavors like this.
Showy vineyard. I love Erziger Würzgarten.
Oh yeah, and it was like 04, I want to say,
so
and it was just
warm, so very tropical.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it tasted like pound cake, like I don't know, like Christmas cake. Dried fruits and cinnamon and nutmeg and marmalade-y, and I was just like, I don't even understand. I couldn't even speak, probably. This is probably the first time I've been able to physically speak about it because it's been that haunting. And this is coming from a winery that makes more wine than all of Canada.
Yeah. Sometimes those big wineries really do just show up and they do something really special. It's not exclusive to small wineries. I think it's more common to find truly groundbreaking stuff from small wineries, but every so often the big lads show up and it's like, no, this is why we're the market leader, and they just drop something absolutely amazing in your lap.
Yep, totally. Yeah, when they can invest millions of dollars and have a separate winemaker just for making their small cuvées, it's almost like a winery within a winery, because those top end cuvées that are selling for $50 to $150, those wines they're probably only making maybe 5,000 cases a year of all those wines. So it's almost like a tiny winery functioning within a massive winery. It's almost a completely separate project. It just happens to be under the same name. And it's a really good way of getting people, to work their way up the scale. They start with the Dr. L Riesling and, spend $15, and they're like, oh, that was really good. And then they see the $22 option. And they're like, well, if that one was good, maybe this one's better. And then they try that, and they work their way up. And so it's almost good to have that level of scale. But yeah, it's, so dialing it back, digressing. This is their
us on this channel digressing, going on weird tangents about wine. That never happens here.
100% of the time, we just lost 90% of our viewership, I'm sure.
No, actually, we gained one. We're up from 20 to 21.
Fantastic. We're just reeling them in with ranting. But yeah, so this is their Love Red is their large production wine, so they're making enough of it to supply us year round. They sell it all across the U.S., and they've recently got crazy accounts like Earls decided that they wanted to have a natural wine program. So that's how forward-thinking some of these people are. And not only that, but how...
Including the Lethbridge Earls? Because I definitely haven't seen an order from the Lethbridge Earls for Love Red
not yet. So they just started launching it in Canada. So there's 4 Earlses in Alberta that are carrying Broc Love Red by the bottle. And it's on their tiny little, they have 5 wines maybe that are their natural wine selection. And that's how much natural wine is going to make it into the mainstream, is that big players like that are like, hey, we need to keep up. And if we don't have natural wine on our list, then we're not going to do well. We still want it to be consumer friendly. We still want it to be approachable and made well. But, we want to play in that market. They're like, that's the way that it's going to go. It's like things like A&W having the Beyond Meat burger. It's like they're realizing that these, what was once considered maybe fringe movements, are now economically viable, and they basically need to do it. They want to be the leaders. And so all across the states in the fancier Earls, they have this by the bottle, which is pretty cool. We've never had a make it on that level.
Eric. Sorry, I've been ignoring the comments and questions like forever. Craig asks, is this the best large production red? Well, Craig, that's a really interesting definition. It is a wine that for Broc Cellars is large production, but for Darren Owers last week, this would be 1/10 of what he considers like an appallingly small amount of wine. And I'll bet that this is also more than our friend Brett Rowland from Averill Creek actually makes of the Jus Red. So large production really depends on who you're talking to. Like 3,000 cases, 3,600 bottles, like to me sounds like a lot of wine. But like on a global scale, that's not even a rounding error. That's how much less like total wine in Arizona sold of Apothic Red yesterday. Like it's not a huge amount of wine in like a global scale. It's a really, really tiny amount. So is it the best large production red? Large production red is a term I couldn't even nail down if I wanted to. Eric, do you want to put a number on large production red? 50,000 cases?
I'd say that it'd have to be like 50,000 cases plus. I think would be like where I would have like large production, because I would consider like a medium-sized winery anywhere up to 50,000 cases a year. Most of the wineries in the Okanagan that are like small, they're making 25,000 cases a year. So they're making more than Broc Cellars in most cases, and that's considered a small winery in the Okanagan. A very sort of like artisanal region. And I think that, probably somewhere in that 25 to 50,000 cases a year would be, I'd say 50,000 cases a year. It's like kind of where you have to draw the line for the minimum requirement for large production.
And this is understanding that like an absolute lifetime ago in 1984, 1985, like Kendall Jackson Chardonnay was the first wine to ever hit 1 million cases of just that wine. It was like, if Apothic Red, I have to assume, sells less than 10 million cases a year, they have to be considering it like a sales disaster and looking at rebranding. Like 50,000 cases to them is barely a rounding error. Like, no, the idea of like 3,000 cases being large production, it's large production for Broc, but it's a tiny amount of wine, and that's part of why you get this high qualities. It's very, very hand done, even on what they consider a large scale.
Yeah, Barefoot Pinot Grigio, they make about 7.5 million cases a year. So they're making like triple the production. Actually, no, I want to say that it was maybe even higher than that. But let's just call it that just for argument's sake. Like you're talking about 3 times the production of Canada of a single wine that they make. Yeah. And they make dozens of different wines.
I know. So it's just like, awful. Yeah. All of it's awful. So let's just get back to the questions here. We're going to run through these as fast as I can. Deirdre asks, with it being 30 degrees C, I'd be tempted to put a chill on this red. Does that make me a horrible person? No, it makes you a really good person, because that would be delicious.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool.
This wine is designed for that, for sure.
On the pronunciation of Deirdre, it's Deirdre. Deirdre, I'm sure, is wrong. So it's her name, but I'm going to tell you how it's pronounced. Tasting notes from Craig on the Love Red. Eric, I'll let you handle this one. Tasting notes on the Love Red? I get a ton of cherry and blackberry, but...
Oh, yeah. It's like super cherry driven for sure. Almost like those like black cherries, like black cherry cola kind of characteristics. But also super bright and fresh. Lots of floral characteristics, almost like that candied rose petal characteristic. Violets is another classic one that you'd expect off of Carignan. This is made predominantly from Carignan. Carignan also usually has some spice notes to it. In this case, it shows less as like herbaceous, more as sweet spices. So almost like allspice, almost a hint of cinnamon, something kind of in that range, but mostly fruit driven, which is what makes this wine so delicious. A lot of people are sort of, they don't think that fruit is a positive quality in wine. They like all the other things. So like, oh, it's not earthy enough. This wine's too simple because it's just fruity. But ultimately, like, wine is made from fruit, and so it should taste like fruit, hopefully. And so I think this is a great example of letting the fruit shine through first, and then having it sort of I don't know, a bunch of other things sort of orbiting around that fruit core. So yeah, cherry, definitely the standout fruit characteristic. Pomegranate, big one for this wine for me too. And then, yeah, those sort of like candied rose petal characteristics, and then that spice element, almost a little bit herbal, but more on the sweet spice end of the spectrum.
Beautiful. Had a couple more questions here briefly. This is a question that you may or may not know the answer to. What's our domestic consumption on wine in Canada, roughly? Because I have no bloody idea.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Not a clue. Yeah, I apologize, but I don't know.
Cool.
Yeah.
Marissa asks, the artist who does the Broc Cellars prints, she does sell them. Are they available on the website? Like, can you get prints delivered?
Yeah, you can. They've done a couple posters in collaboration with her. So if you wanted something sort of larger production like that, you can do that. She's also done T-shirts for them. Like I have the Broc 10-year anniversary T-shirt from them, which is amazing, and the Got Grapes T-shirt, which is really hilarious. And then on her own personal website, you can commission her to do things for you, or buy her like more studio pieces. So yeah, there's definitely some options if you want to support her business while supporting Broc at the same time.
Beautiful. Eric, we talked a little bit about this off camera already. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what's coming up? What are we expecting from juice imports over the next 3 months? What's going to make people summers for them?
Oh yeah, this is like honestly the most ridiculous couple months of deliveries that I've ever seen. So right now, this week, we had Domaine de la Grelière, the new vintage just landed.
Yep.
So that means Gamay Central-Ala will be back, which is like everybody's favorite wine.
Yeah, we didn't get it last time. We got shorted.
Yeah, this year it's like even riper. They had a very weird year, like a heat spike. And so it's basically Loire Valley Gamay Noir that has not been messed around with at all, yet it's 14.5% alcohol. So it is like ultra juicy, super rich, really supple, but still fresh. It's like such an anomaly, but like absolutely delicious. As well as their entry level Sauvignon Blanc, which is just like crisp, fresh, vibrant, everything that you love.
Is that the Blanc de la Marillier, or is that a step below that?
Yeah.
The Blanc de la Marillier is just fantastic. Absolutely adore that.
Oh yeah, totally. And so we got new vintages of all their other wines. We just got in a new shipment of Strekov, which is, again, the best wines coming out of Slovakia, that's for sure.
That's certainly true, yes.
Yeah, and so one of them is going to go in our Natural Wine Club, which if you're not signed up for it already, I definitely suggest doing that. It's great value, as well as you get a podcast, which is mostly me ranting, and a newsletter.
So if you've enjoyed this evening and want more of you ranting about things, they should sign up for your Natural Wine Club, or at least sign up for your podcast.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they get your podcast? Is it exclusive to members of the Natural Wine Club, or can they search for it on their local podcast?
You can search for it on Spotify. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you can search for it on Spotify. I think we're also on Apple Music now, so you can see it on there. But it's us directly talking about the wines in the wine club. That being said, you guys usually stock the wines anyway. So if there was one that was a real standout from the podcast, you can definitely pick it up from Andrew Hilton. So yeah, one of the wines from Strekov is going to go into the wine club. We ordered it specifically for wine club because it was just so outrageous when we went and visited him last year. As well as we're getting in some Pinot Noir from him, so Slovakian Pinot Noir, which is mental. Some really funky rosé, sparkling rosé, which is just outrageous and weird. But I think if you get the right geeky people into it, they'll be all on board. It's the craziest color I've ever seen. It's like glows in the bottle. And then 2 weeks from now, we have two equally insane shipments. We're getting in the new vintage of Gudogau, which we've been sold out of Gudogau for like
18
I don't know
months, feeling like.
Yeah,
it's been forever.
Yeah, last vintage sold out so fast. It's we were kind of astonished, and we maybe under ordered this vintage a little bit because we had no idea that they were going to sell out that fast. So what we have is what we have. So we're getting in Teodora, Vinifred. We're getting a brand new cuvee that nobody's ever seen before.
Ooh,
we're
tell
getting
us about that.
Yeah, it's from a completely untended vineyard. They just let it do its own thing. There's like they don't do anything. They don't prune it. They don't trim the grass. They let trees grow in the vineyard. If if deer want to eat the grapes that year, then they don't make it. It's just like completely a wild child. They have no idea what grape variety it is. It's white of some sort in theory, and it's called Edmund. And I don't remember how much of it we're getting. 12 bottles, maybe something like that.
Can we have some?
Possibly. I'll have to take a look at your allocation. I can't remember.
I do want to just let that lead into something because we had a question from Craig saying, we got shorted. Yeah, that must be awkward. No, it's not. Like with small production stuff like this, it's very much like, if you and I were talking 6 months ago and we talked about Edmund and I'd said I wanted all of it, you'd have probably said, yes, you can have that. And, coming around now, I'd be kind of Johnny come lately and it wouldn't work. No, a lot of this stuff is very handshake. You show an interest like, we bought all of the Vinegar Balfkek Francos. I'm sure you brought that in with the idea that 10 stores will list it, and then I just took it all like an asshole, and that happens sometimes.
100%.
These small batch wines, like there's not, there's a little tiny like giving Eric a hard time, not seriously in jest about things sometimes, but like there's no sour grapes with these like super tiny allotment wines selling out. Unless it's on the cover of Wine Spectator and you gave all of it to Liquor Depot and screwed every independent.
Yeah.
Which I will say does happen occasionally, and a giant middle finger to the people who do that. But yeah, no. Oh yeah, Aaron just reminded me not to flip off the entire audience. But yeah, no. For a lot of these small lot wines, like we tasted that Tempranillo Blanco when we bought 10 out of the 11 cases that came to Alberta because we loved it and. It was just like, we did ask, hey, can we buy a lot of this? And they didn't have an issue with it. But for the most part, a lot of these, it's like, no, like if it gets sold out, it gets sold out and better luck next time around, The scarcity helps drive sales.
Yeah, there's a lot of times too where it's like you guys will request like one case being like, that's what I think we could sell of this really weird, maybe not inexpensive wine. And then you bring it in, it sells out in a day. And then you're like, can we have more of that? And it's like, no, sorry. Like
because people who had more confidence got it earlier. Yeah.
Totally. And then there's the opposite situation sometimes too, where it's like you bring in this wine that, we think is really cool. We think tastes delicious. You bring it in and nobody buys it. And then you're stuck with 4 cases. And it's like, that's an equivalently bad situation. So it's, you're always on sort of one side of that coin. You're never right in the middle, it seems, where you've ordered the exact right amount that everybody wants. And everybody who wants one can get as much as they want, but no more. And so it's, it's never going to work out that way. And, we're fine with that. 90% of our portfolio, we get less than 60 bottles a year of for all of Alberta. So that means 260 different wines that we get in a year, we get less than 60 bottles for all of Alberta. So that
dovetails really interestingly into a question we just had. How much volume do you sell in terms of cases in a year? Are you closer to 3,000 or 30,000, I guess would be Craig's question here. And then the other one that we'll just go straight into is, what are you drinking? I know what you're drinking because I asked earlier. But the crowd doesn't know. Dave doesn't know.
We're like, I think you nailed it with the 3,000 cases. So yeah, we're probably somewhere around 3,000 to 5,000 cases a year, I would guess. Maybe it's more than that now. I don't really know. I haven't.
If you pressed me how many cases I sell in a year, I wouldn't bloody be able to tell you to save my life.
Oh yeah,
not in a trillion years. No idea.
Yeah. So it's but I know that when I first got into this business, I was basically told that we needed to sell a pallet a week in order to be able to pay ourselves. And that was just me at that time. And we've discovered that that's not the case at all because we don't need to make as much money as some people think that they need to make, apparently.
Well, if you don't have a sales force of 9 reps across the province, no.
Totally. And when we don't expect to be making $150,000 a year, like we're in it because we love wine. So we can kind of get away with selling, we probably sell like 100 cases a week But some of those are 6-packs, some of those are beers, some of those are ciders, which are a lot less expensive. But yeah, that's kind of like what our grand total business is looking like. We're pretty transparent about everything from our markup to how much we sell to who we sell to. Like we want to, if any of that stuff was a secret, we wouldn't be super stoked on ourselves, I suppose. And then to answer the question of what I'm drinking some wine from Valentina Pasalacqua. So this is Negro Amaro.
And
from,
god damn, I love her wines. Like,
they're
just stunning. I think we have 5 of them in the store now, and they're just magic.
Mm-hmm. We're already virtually sold out of everything. We brought in 8 or 9 different wines from her, and we're down to just 3 left, and that was less than a month ago. We already have another shipment coming from her, which is awesome. So we're super excited to be able to work with her. Biodynamic vineyard in Puglia in southern Italy, working exclusively with indigenous grape varieties. And this is
which
theory,
to me says Negro Amaro, Malvasia Nera, and now I'm reaching.
So we're talking about Fiano. We're talking about Nero di Troia.
I've
talking
heard
about
Nero di Troia. Yeah, that's a thing I've probably read about in book. Oh, Primitivo, I know, yes.
Bombino Bianco. Falangina.
I have had, yes.
Yeah, Falangina is delicious. It's one of the most amazing wines. Most underrated grape variety is Greco and Fiano for sure. And then she works with some grape varieties that I've never heard of before. Like Aletico, I think is the other one. Cool. Some weird, really rare grape variety that I've never seen before. But yeah,
that's the great thing about doing this is just keep on surprising me.
Totally. Yeah, that's definitely the goal for sure.
And Carol, yes, I also adore the red. The red is absolute magic. I can't imagine really liking this much more than I already do. Unless it was the Cuckoo Cab Franc, which of course I can't get. So,
And is also double the price.
And is,
so
no, it's like $10 a bottle more on the shellfish and change.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's 20.
Okay, it's almost twice. Whatever, it's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Eric. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time.
No, thank you for having me. I always love doing these things. So whenever you guys want to have me, just let me know.
Yeah, we will absolutely let you know. And one of these days, when everything changes, we'll have you down and we'll just have one of those afternoons where we hang out in the store and we just open whatever on the shelves strikes our fancy.
Sounds great. I love those days.
Then we'll go out for dinner or something.
Yeah, perfect. I've been waiting.
Good. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you so much again for doing this.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me. I'll see you guys again. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. So that was Eric Mercier of Juice Imports, our very, very good friend and spectacularly good guest because he just knows so much more than I do. Those were our patio crusher wines, and I hope you enjoyed them on a patio. I hope you were able to enjoy this lovely heat, which I hope isn't turning into a thunderstorm. It's really hard to tell what the natural light looks like with all these hot lights burning on me, but it does seem to be suspiciously turning slightly blue like we might be getting a thunderstorm. I hope that's not the case. Either way, we're getting distracted. So we will see you folks on Wednesday for our fruit and not fruit beer tasting. And then we will be 2 Fridays away. It will be our Aaron needs to go canoeing and we need to just take a bit of a recess so I can actually get some Friday night sleep recess. So yeah, we will see you in 3 weeks for Beaujolais. For the meantime, I'm Kyle with Andrew Hilton Wine and Spirits. Thank you all so much for joining us on a Friday night and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much and goodbye. Traced a finger across his face. Thought of the snapshot that he wore that day in some distant town and place. Keep your thoughts to yourself.